In 1988, Keenen Ivory Wayans was approached by 20th Century Fox television executives, fresh off a successful directorial debut of I'm Gonna Get You Sucker.
Pumps, rhythm and soul.
Preach, brother!
Who are these guys?
It's my theme music. Every good hero should have some.
I'm gonna get you sucker.
Which grossed $13 million against its $3 million budget. Fox executives have sought out Ivory Wayans to produce a show for their then fledgling network. At first confused with the network's television prospects, with Ivory Wayans hoping instead to secure a deal for his follow-up feature, the network made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Ivory Wayans first widely broke into the industry as an actor and writer, co-starring and co-penning the critically acclaimed satire Hollywood Shuffle, a comedy that examines the racial stereotyping in the film industry and the pursuit of aspiring black actors.
Ricky, can you tell us what you've been doing since you've graduated?
Well, Robert, I've played 9 crooks, 4 gang leaders, 2 dope dealers. I played a rapist twice.
Whoa.
That was fun.
They'll never play the Rambos until they stop playing the Sambos.
Directed and co-written by Robert Townsend, who Ivory Wayans first met as a young improv comic in New York, Townsend and Ivory Wayans would form a tight rapport, sharing in their like-minded comedic and satirical approach to comedy that often highlighted the absurdities of culture and society.
Bobby, I need a little more black. You know what I'm saying? Like, stick your ass out, bug the eyes. You know how they move, you know?
Yeah, jive ass.
Let's slate it. Let's go again.
Okay, sorry, Sidney.
Both would go on to collaborate once again on Eddie Murphy's Raw.
I called Richard Pryor's house up and said, yo, Richard, Bill Cosby just called me up and told me I was too dirty. I said, do the people laugh when you say what you say? I said, yes. He said, do you get paid? I said, yes. He said, well, tell Bill. I said, have a Coke and a smile and shut up.
Given the wide success of Ivory Wayans' I'm Gonna Get You Sucker, particularly amongst black audiences, and the emerging popularity of edgy, irreverent, and more realistic television programming of the late 80s and early 90s, Fox executives have sought out Ivory Wayans to create a new form of sketch comedy with an urban focus. While reluctant at first, Wayans was persuaded to develop the project further after network heads assured him that he had total creative freedom over the project.
After I'm Gonna Get You Sucker, I got a meeting at Fox. Well, actually, I screened the movie for movie side of all the studios, and I got a call from Fox TV. And they said, well, look, we're a new network, and, unlike the other networks, we'll let you do anything you want to do.
And thus became In Living Color. Largely responsible for springboarding the careers of Jim Carrey, Jamie Foxx, David Alan Grier, and Jennifer Lopez, to name a few. In Living Color was notable for its provocative and boundary-pushing comedy that often utilized harmful stereotypes in satirical and whimsical manner, drawing just as much ire as admiration of critics and fans for its unabashedly raw humor and social commentary. Fan-favorite sketches like Homie the Clown, the Homeboy Shopping Network, and East Hollywood Squares, and indeed, the trademark of In Living Color as a whole, invoked absurdist elements and racial stereotyping as a form of satire, poking fun and skewering preconceived notions about race and groups while highlighting deeper inequalities pervasive within culture.
I was buying a shirt at this clothing store, so I gave the salesman my Equity Express Gold card.
I got a call from the store manager. He said he was suspicious of a customer trying to use an Equity Express card, so I ran a check on his credit.
I knew my credit was good, but the manager asked to see my driver's license. I gave him that. My birth certificate, no problem. Mother's maiden name, I had that too.
There was no doubt that it was his card. But I wasn't giving up so fast.
Then the lady asked me who won the Bob Hope Invitational Golf Tournament in 1978. I said, kiss my butt, bitch. Approve my credit.
Following his tumultuous departure from In Living Color in 1992, Ivory Wayans returned to film, producing the 1996 cult film Don't Be a Menace to South Central While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood, or simply as it's known among fans, Don't Be a Menace, was a particular standout. And what is now a Wayans specialty, Don't Be a Menace, written and starring Ivory Wayans' younger brothers Sean and Marlon Wayans, parodied 90s hood films. Films that earnestly and dramatically depicted the struggles of young black men against a backdrop of street gangs, inner city life, lack of resources, incarceration, pressures of adulthood, and a dearth of positive role models. Jokes at the expense of fatherlessness, promiscuous men and women, incarcerated people, sexual assault, poverty, and inner city violence all made the rounds. The Wayans' emerging shotgun approach to comedy, coupled with their biting social commentary, was at its zenith with Don't Be a Menace, aspects of which would go on to influence a particular future Wayans film. That's foreshadowing. Still, despite critical panning, Don't Be a Menace was a box office success, bringing in just over $20 million against its nearly $4 million budget, quickly becoming a cult hit in process, with fans adoring the film for its Wayans brand of unrestrained racial and social comedy, and also firmly established the careers of Sean and Marlon Wayans as bona fide actors and comedic writers. Then, in 1996, came Scream.
Hello?
Hello.
Who is this?
Tell me your name, I'll tell you mine.
I don't think so.
Like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
Scream, directed by horror icon Wes Craven, starring an ensemble cast of Drew Barrymore, David Arquette, Neve Campbell, Jamie Kennedy, Skeet Ulrich, and Matthew Lillard, was released to critical and financial acclaim. The satirical slasher tackled and even subverted tropes of horror that, up to that point, had become tired and drawn-out staples of the genre, going as far as to kill one of its leads in the opening of the film. The film lampooned horror cliches like red herrings, the genre's fixation on virginity and promiscuity, its quote-unquote teenage cast, and even weird and dumb character and horror movie logic, with its killer masquerading as a literal Halloween ghost, being the cherry on top of the satirical sandwich. Its self-aware meta-humor widely resonated with audiences, and eventually led to a wave of equally self-aware slashers, for better or worse. So, question. How do you make fun of a film that already makes fun of itself? In the late 90s, Dimension Films, a label of parent company Miramax at the time, bought two film scripts, one tentatively titled Scream If You Know What I Did Last Halloween, written by Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer, and another untitled script written by Sean Wayans, Marlon Wayans, Buddy Johnson, and Phil Bowman. The Weinsteins, yes, those Weinsteins, then owners of Miramax, have specifically sought out scripts that lampoon their own Scream, hoping to continue cashing in on the success the franchise created, while also wanting to keep any skewering of their own films under their own helm. By the request of his younger brothers, and with Dimension Films moving forward with the duo's script, Keenen and Ivory Wayans lent his hand in development of the project and agreed to direct. For the new parody, the entire Wayans, Johnson, and Bowman team had come up with 10 different versions of the script, with several white drafts, black drafts, high school drafts, and college drafts, as Marlon Wayans described, seemingly not being able to find the right mark. It wasn't until the team gave their full attention to the growing world of late 90s slashers, particularly I Know What You Did Last Summer, Scream, and their respective sequels, that they finally come up with the ideas for the final script, which they then titled Scary Movie, coincidentally being the original name for the film Scream. As a quick aside, the other parody script bought by Dimension, the one written by Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer, was never actually used, nor did any of its original ideas remain in the finished script by the Wayans. Despite this, due to a Writers Guild of America dispute, Friedberg and Seltzer received full writing co-credits for Scary Movie, a decision by the guild that did not sit well with the Wayans, who proclaimed that none of the duo's ideas were never incorporated into the final script. As another quick aside, Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer would go on to pen many of the derivative spin-offs of Scary Movie, which have not been well received. Though, more on that later. With a budget of $19 million, principal photography for Scary Movie commenced in Vancouver, British Columbia, with actors and crew booked into the Sutton Palace, an extended stay hotel which doofy actor Dave Sheridan dubbed as the Slut Inn. A factoid that has nothing to do with this video, but felt fitting to include. Filming commenced primarily in the fishing village of Steveston Harbor in Richmond, and at the nearby school, the Vancouver Technical Secondary School, which was given the humorous title of B.A. Corpse High School in the film. The principal cast was largely composed of relative newcomers: John Abrahams, Dave Sheridan, Regina Hall, Shannon Elizabeth, and especially Anna Faris, having little to no prior experience filming. Faris was so green that she lived in constant fear of being fired throughout production, confused as to how she landed the humorous role, with their lack of experience being wholly apparent when director Ivory Wayans yelled action at the start of the scene, with Faris having little to no clue what he was talking about. Faris hadn't originally planned to pursue the role of Cindy Campbell, let alone pursue the career of acting. Prior to Scary Movie, Faris had planned to move to London for a job at an ad agency, but had a change of heart at the last minute, and relocated to Los Angeles instead to pursue acting full-time. Her mother had originally helped her film her audition tape in Washington, her original residence, for the role of Cindy Campbell, which was recorded on a ridiculously sized old-school on-the-shoulder camcorder. Faris described having to seek out a neighbor to film the more raunchier scenes of the audition, mortified of having to ask her mother to do so. After producers received the tape favorably, and with Faris now in Los Angeles, in-person auditions were quickly set up, and after some back and forths, Faris secured the role of Cindy Campbell.
Yes, my very first big audition was for Scary Movie. I auditioned every day in front of Keenen, every day for a week. When I got the job at the end of the week, I thought they're gonna fire me because I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm not funny. At the time I was, and well, I'm still not very funny.
Regina Hall was actually advised early on in the pre-production of Scary Movie by an unnamed producer not to take up the role of Brenda Meeks, suggesting that the role of loud black girl may result in typecasting in the industry. However, being a big fan of the Wayans and trusting their comedic insight, Hall decided to move forward anyways, auditioning for the role a total of 4 times before conclusively landing the gig.
I did have a producer tell me not to do Scary Movie. That was kind of like, I get it now, but I was like, no, of course I'm doing Scary Movie. I was a huge fan of the Wayans, and Keenen Ivory Wayans was directing it, and I was like, this is it, this is it.
Dave Sheridan, on the other hand, showed up to auditions for the role of Doofy entirely in character, never breaking and intentionally stammering and messing up his lines on purpose. The audition for the supposed intellectually disabled man was so convincing that his agent called him back 10 minutes after the audition to tell him to immediately return to the office to show Ivory Wayans and the producers that he was, in fact, just acting. As shooting for the film commenced, director Ivory Wayans was noted by actors and crew for his instinctual malleability. Malleability. Director Ivory Wayans was noted by actors and crew for his instinctual malleability. While the film had a script, Ivory Wayans encouraged his actors to introduce their own original material and take risks with their performances, even if it meant looking completely foolish, an approach to comedy that the Wayans have lived by, with Ivory Wayans having described comedy as having no vanity.
Keenen used to always say there's no vanity in comedy. I always just realized, okay, just be honest. You don't have to look cute, you don't have to look crazy. I think with him, I just had a lot more trust in myself because Keenen, he really liked to let you do what you did best. Encouraged and allowed a lot of improv, and so it was a real self-discovery and opportunity to kind of trust my instincts.
This structured but freeing approach by Ivory Wayans to performance and comedy nurtured much of the camaraderie amongst his cast, creating an atmosphere free from inhibition and pretense, really allowing for the chemistry of his actors to really shine through in their performances. An atmosphere that Scary Movie's cast have spoken of admirably since filming's conclusion, with Sherry O'Terry likening filming to being like kids in a sandbox, with the stern but loving Keenen Ivory Wayans watching over everything, with Shannon Elizabeth, Lachlan Monroe, Dave Sheridan, and Anna Faris echoing the sentiment, placing much trust in Ivory Wayans and the brothers' comedic instincts. While much of pre-production was dedicated to hammering out various drafts of the script, largely at the behest of director Ivory Wayans, with Marlon and Sean Wayans lamenting their older brother's dedication to perfecting a script, having drafted 10 different versions of Scary Movie, with 27 drafts of Don't Be a Menace.
It was a really good idea, and I thought, okay, this is the one. You guys go write this. And they wrote it, brought it to me, I gave them notes on it, and we went back and forth about 10 drafts.
Like 20 drafts.
Yeah. And even after the studio greenlit it, I said, okay, let's go back to it. And then we all sat down and punched it up and added more stuff.
What's funny about pop culture? You do it in layers. And then you go, who's the characters and what's funny about them. And then you pass it to Keenen, who tells you, it all sucks, redo everything.
Yeah, you work you harder than Kathy Lee at a sweatshop.
We do have a lot of fun working with each other, and my mother makes us.
The Wayans still allowed themselves space to deviate from the script. Though, at one point in production, due to script rewrites by Sean and Ivory Wayans, Marlon Wayans had shown up one day to film scenes for his character Shorty, only to find out that his character had been entirely written out of the script. Nonetheless, Ivory Wayans gleefully invoked his younger brother to come up with material, with every scene in the film involving Shorty having been shot the same day it was written. Scary Movie would go on to open in the summer, releasing on July 7th, 2000, and despite its relatively modest budget and newbie cast, it massively exceeded expectations, debuting at #1 at the box office, with an opening weekend gross of just over $42 million. Going on to screen to over 3,300 theaters domestically and internationally, Scary Movie went on to gross more than $157 million in the States, and an additional $121 million in foreign markets, setting the record for the highest grossing film by a black director at the time. Scary Movie was widely regarded as one of the best films ever made, cementing its legacy further by debuting at #1 on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies list, dethroning previous consensus greatest film of all time, Citizen Kane. That is until Dana Carvey's perennial masterpiece, Master in Disguise, took the #1 spot just 2 years later. Oh, this is so great.
You are a fatty. What is happening? Ah, save me!
So wholesome.
Who shook that?
Now you try.
Who is your daddy?
This will definitely age like fine wine.
Going to call him Buttercup.
So, what actually made Scary Movie so good? What had set apart Scary Movie from typical spoofs, its tired cliches, and the genre's over-reliance on gags was, in a lot of ways, the Wayans' understanding and deliberate steering away from that. From its onset, writers Sean and Marlon Wayans sought not just to make a humorous version of pre-existing horror and popular slashers, but craft a parody that would be able to stand on its own right, with an emphasis on character and narration. Ivory Wayans importantly noted that what resonated with audiences the most was narrative. Now, Scary Movie does have its share of gags, and its story is largely just a retreading of Scream with bits of I Know What You Did Last Summer sprinkled in between, but its humor is largely focused on its silly characters, and its relatively grounded nature stands in stark comparison to post-Wayans sequels and spin-offs. What is immediately apparent about Scary Movie is that it isn't just making fun of Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and other self-aware slashers and horrors that had grown in exceeding popularity at the time, but is in fact trying to craft its own version of these films. John Abrahams isn't just parodying Skeet Ulrich's sex-driven creepy killer Billy. Elizabeth Shannon's Buffy isn't just a phone-in composite of Helen Shivers and Tatum Riley, and to call Anna Faris to Cindy Campbell a ripoff of Neve Campbell's Final Girl and Sidney Prescott would be a massive disservice to both actresses. What's apparent in these characterizations is that each actor's individual artistic choices, and by extension, their charisma, was allowed to pierce through, guided by Keenen Ivory Wayans' unique sensibilities and approach to comedic directing, and free from most of the restraints of a written script. It gave actors more lateral space to imbue the satire and evocations with their own individual comedic senses, in effect, changing its acts of parody into more of a retelling. Anna Faris wasn't just parodying Neve Campbell's Sidney Prescott. This was her version of Sidney Prescott.
I'm sorry if my complicated life is an inconvenience to your perfect existence.
Cindy.
Putting it simply, Scary Movie's characters are funny. And because its characters are funny, you engage with the film on a different level, drawing you to its narrative despite its scattershot story. And as a quick aside, despite Anna Faris' very obvious comedic capabilities, it's interesting to note that during filming, she was wholeheartedly conflicted as to how anyone could even find her funny. Faris later recalled how she pulled director Keenen Ivory Wayans aside one day towards the conclusion of filming to ask why she was even chosen for the role, believing wholeheartedly that she herself lacked any comedic intuition. Ivory Wayans responding that her obliviousness to her humor is what made her funny.
When I was cast in Scary Movie, I was convinced I was going to get fired. I called my college roommate, and she said, "Oh, Anna, you are not funny." And I was like, I know. I think I realized later on when Keenen told me, like a moment of confidence towards the end of the shoot, I asked Keenen Ivory Wayans why he casted me. He said, because you have no idea what makes you funny. And that was a depressing, because it wasn't necessarily my goal. What I've come to realize is that I don't know what my face does when I move it.
Though, all this still leaves the question, how do you make fun of a film that already makes fun of itself? The difficulties of lampooning the meta and self-aware nature of its main subject, Scream, were wholly apparent in Scary Movie's extensive writing, as we've already discussed. To add, Keenen Ivory Wayans often returned notes to scriptwriters and his brothers that jokes they had written for their spoof had already been done by Scream.
A spoof of a satire, that's what I like to say. Scream was definitely a satire, and that made big challenge for us, because I would say to the guys, they already told that joke. You can't go where they went, we had to go somewhere else.
So, how did they do it? Well, for Scary Movie, the end product at work was a balance of literalism and absolute absurdism. Wholly goofy and irreverent, Scary Movie's humor invoked a type of fantastic realism. Its outlandish and absurd humor painted with occasional strokes of the seriousness of social and observational commentary. And certainly some of Scary Movie's best moments come from the successful execution of this balancing act. Cindy's absolute terror in the face of the killer infiltrating her home being turned to earnest bewilderment as she becomes aware of how horrible at hiding he actually is.
You're behind the couch.
The black news crew reporting on the death of a white high school student immediately fleeing the scene to avoid being falsely accused.
Reporting live for Black TV. White folks are dead, we're getting the fuck out of here. Let's roll down. Let's go, motherfucker. Go.
Brenda's murder at the theater being a double play, lampooning Jada Pinkett Smith's death in Scream 2, and a joke at the expense of loud movie audiences, and the cast poking fun at odd casting choices for people in films that often depict high school-age students, and some of it is just stupidly funny. Cindy's annoyance and obtuseness towards Greg after they accidentally killed somebody, Buffy's incredulousness at having just hit a boot, poking fun at the framing of that very scene in I Know What You Did Last Summer, Greg's anger at the killer knowing he has a small penis, quickly turning to absolute serious defensiveness, James Vanderbeek's unsuspecting cameo as Dawson Leary, and bringing Scream's subtextual queer coding of Killer Stu and Billy to a surface level.
That's right, Cindy. I'm gay. And in case you haven't noticed, so is Ray.
What? I ain't gay.
What are you talking about? You took her to that club.
So they play good music.
All right.
Yeah, come on, man! You guys are psychos!
Give me a night. Fuck out of here. Ain't nobody stabbing me.
The blending of the serious with humorous and absurdist elements is an aspect that has remained characteristic of the Wayans style, a comedic approach most apparent in Living Color, Don't Be a Menace, and Ivory Wayans' early collaborations with Robert Townsend. For example, the sketches of Homie the Clown often involve the titular character, a black man recently released from prison working as a clown, laying into everyone and everything, while indicting institutions and systems for the inequalities they cause. The sketches of Ed Cash and Carl Pathos involve the pair of fictional televangelists often invoking their congregation to hand over their cash and wallets, shaming and scorning those who refused, while Hollywood Shuffle featured many surrealist vignettes that utilized racist elements with a deadpan delivery. This specific approach to comedy by the Wayans was shaped, in part, by the events of their tumultuous upbringing in public housing in New York, where Keenen Ivory Wayans often described being subject to brawls and racial slurs on a daily basis, having to work menial jobs to help make ends meet, with all 10 of his siblings living under one apartment. The other major influence was the comedy of Richard Pryor, who often took aim at many groups, including blacks, and along with other Richard Pryor disciples and early Wayans collaborators like Robert Townsend and Paul Mooney, the latter of which often sought to use provocation and scathing comedy as a tool to further cultural discourse, and perhaps to even intentionally ruffle feathers. The Wayans took note, and began evolving beyond mere Pryor imitators by pushing the boundaries of comedy even further, with Ivory Wayans often instructing his writer's room in Living Color to take comedy as far as they can take it. For the Wayans, much like Pryor and his comedic offspring, lampooning, mocking, and poking fun was a tool used to highlight and provide cultural critiques and commentary, big or small. The brand of comedy often invokes satire as a means to illuminate real pains, struggles present within culture and society, typically as they disproportionately affected blacks and other people of color, with Keenen and Ivory Wayans having described comedy as a mask for pain.
That what people don't understand is that comedy is the mask for pain. So people who are innately funny are innately disturbed.
Even seemingly silly sketches like In Living Color's Imposture, which involved Jim Carrey mocking the rapper Snow, called attention to bigger issues like cultural appropriation and the poaching of black culture for mass consumption.
My reggae's watered down. Hear me on the radio, think I could not be blacker. But on my video, you see I'm really a cracker. Pretending I was a rasta since I was in jammies. I should pay my face and start betting out Mary.
And as Marlon and Shawn Wayans took note as well, Don't Be a Menace was their own apotheosis of this Pryor Wayans philosophy, where the brothers took to lampooning not just their hood film subjects, but took jabs at police injustice, lack of job opportunities, lack of positive role models, poverty, and even calling attention to passive misogyny within the culture.
So will I see you again?
Sorry, baby. You know there ain't no positive black females in these movies.
As Marlon Wayans put it, it's better to laugh at something than cry. Though their comedic social consciousness, coupled with their initiative to push comedy as far as they can take it, often collided, resulting in mixed messaging that often blurred the lines between illumination and offensiveness, with critics and fans having reaped praise on Wayans' works almost as often as they have admonished it. Sketches like In Living Color's Men on Film received polarized responses, critics taking umbrage with the sketch's caricature portrayal of gay men, with the punchline often being the effeminate expressions and gyrations of its catty hosts, while others have praised it for portraying wholly unashamed and flamboyant gay men on mainstream television. Likewise, the plethora of popular In Living Color's racial sketches and the Wayans brothers' Don't Be a Menace were all critically lambasted for playing off of and perpetuating harmful stereotypes, even as the underlying message was largely a condemnation of that. Yet still, the Wayans' proclivity for provocative comedy often left humor that seemed to partake in offending for the sakes of it.
A little bit about the apartment, shall I? Firstly, this locale is ideal for you. There is a Golden Bird fried chicken right down on the corner. And do you know something? There is a crack house over on 7th.
Keenen Ivory Wayans and Robert Townsend's Hollywood Shuffle drew some criticisms towards some of its depictions of gay men. In Living Color's Bolt 45 depicted actor Billy D. Williams, played by Ivory Wayans, unsuspectingly prying women with high amounts of alcohol to sexually assault them. And in the case of our main subject, Scary Movie's closeted gay Ray was as cartoony as he was sinister, as was Mr. Man, playing off a persistent and problematic trope in media that paints all manners of queer folk as scheming and sexually deviant. And in the respect of the Wayans' need for provocativeness, Scary Movie wasn't any different. It contained jokes at the expense of fat people, poor people, the homeless, men on women violence, black people, white people, sexual assault, more queer jokes, and notably doofy. Oh god. And even older, well-intentioned works, like the sketches of Homie the Clown, amongst many others, masks some real mean-spiritedness.
She's about, I'd say, one fat bitch.
The Scary Movie, while it certainly wasn't written to be a biting satire on culture and society, the Wayans' boundary-pushing first approach to its humor meant that its comedy hasn't aged particularly well. Still, while the film is far from the more motivated and deliberate social-political commentary of the Wayans' past, it does still contain glimpses of the Wayans' trademark social satire and characters like Brenda and Shorty, who, while hearkening back to offensive stereotypes about black people, their inclusion, in part, did relay an aspect of the black voice, in contrast to the often logically dubious white voices pervasive in horror media. And Doofy, for as ridiculous as he is, his scenes often involve him turning the tables on people seeking to take advantage of him, adding some sense of audience subversion.
What's that? That's when you know you become a man, Doofy.
Hey, Terry, smell my finger.
What the hell is that?
My ass.
Get the hell out of here, Doofy.
When asked if a film like Scary Movie would be made in today's cultural climate, cast member John Abrams, and producer Bro Zanga expressed skepticism if a film with as many gay jokes and gross out humor as Scary Movie has would even move forward. However, it was Marlon Wayans who said something very illuminating, and it's something that I've always felt was most important overall when it comes to engaging with potentially objectionable and offensive comedy, and that is intent. What is the intent of your jokes? Or as Marlon put it, is it to humiliate or is it to make people laugh? Though I will say there's a blind spot when it comes to the Wayans' specific interpretation of objectionability. And that is, as well-meaning as you may be, and even if your intent isn't specifically to humiliate, even the most well-intentioned jokes can still degrade people in groups.
You have all these people with these deep accents. Why you act like you learn anything from 9/11? I want to see his passport.
Furthermore, a lot of this type of humor is just low-hanging fruit. It's lazy comedy, and as such, are only largely remembered for their attempts to be deliberately shocking than for their actual comedic content. I mean, no one remembers what a Serbian film was about or even cares. All people fixate on is its on-the-nose and drab attempts at trying to shock, and that's a one-trick pony. Though, that's not to say there isn't a value to shocking audiences. In fact, Scary Movie's legacy serves largely as a time capsule, whose shock value and provocative nature allows us to look back into a particular time and place where sensibilities were different, for better or worse. Shock value can also inspire discussion on the acceptability and limits of entertainment and media. And some shock value can even inspire discussions and introspections about our values and ideals. Though, like comedy, not all shock value is created equal, and your mileage will vary on how valuable or valid you find shock value. And oftentimes, shock, like satire and comedy, that intent can be missed. Are you hoping to inspire a bigger point about society, culture, and entertainment, or do you risk just coming off as an edgelord? Who's to say? Ultimately, though, the main point of all is that I can't tell you what is or isn't offensive, because that's going to largely depend on your own experiences, upbringing, and values. For culture as a whole, what's acceptable and the boundaries of comedy will always be in flux. Seemingly, at its best, or worse, comedy being an act that places artistic endeavor and cultural sensibilities between a rock and a hard place. Now, I don't want to endlessly litigate the validity of comedy because we don't have an endless amount of time, and this is ultimately a video about a movie that has a joke where someone gets plastered onto the ceiling by a blast of jizz. This is just a reminder that this topic is always going to be more complex and nuanced than what we typically find people yelling about on the internet. Now, knowing all of this, does this make someone a bad person for enjoying Scary Movie? No. Does the comedy make Wayans bad people? No. And does that mean comedy has to be socially conscious to be funny? Heck no. I mean, we all laugh for a variety of reasons. Personally, I don't find a lot of the objectionable and offensive material keeps me from enjoying the movie and some of its sequels. I mean, a lot of it is in bad taste, and some of it is just, good God. And I do think comedy now is for the better, that it's less acceptable to just lazily invoke stereotypes and offensive humor for the sake of it. But the intent here with Scary Movie and the Wayans isn't exactly mean-spirited, most of the time. And this is ultimately a film that has a guy that has a near-death experience at a glory hole. Like, that's important perspective. It's not Birth of a Nation. In fact, for me, while I don't find a lot of the humor particularly tasteful nowadays, there's a profound absurdist element to the film that I find mesmerizing and deeply funny. Shawn Wayans' sinister yet earnest, deadpan, and bad at being closeted performance as a closeted Ray is just so silly that you can't help but laugh.
Come on! Yes, Brendan! Take it, Brendan! Take it, Brendan! Who? Brenda! Come on, put the helmet on!
Marlon Wayans' performance as a stone out of his mind shorty is literally iconic. Cherry O'Terry's performance playing off of Courtney Cox's aggressive reporter in Scream is just stupidly funny.
2 teens dead.
And Anna Faris is Anna Faris, so you find yourself chuckling at just about every scene she's in, regardless if some of those scenes haven't aged particularly well. And I mentioned it before, but the film is an interesting look back at what people deemed mostly acceptable as comedy a few years ago. Scary Movie's massive success cemented it as an iconic and must-watch comedy, and it's certainly a standout amongst its subsequent parody peers, even drawing a favorable review from one Roger Ebert, who was known to be particularly critical of spoof films in general. With the success of Scary Movie, Dimension Films immediately greenlit productions of a sequel, titled, wait for it, Scary Movie 2. With the original Scary Movie's release date of July 7th, 2000, Scary Movie 2 opened wide less than a year later on the Independence Day weekend of July 4th, 2001. Shawn Wayans has since described the grueling nature of Scary Movie 2's speedy production, with scriptwriting, casting, location scouting, principal photography, and editing all reportedly being completed within 9 months. Less than half of the 2 years the team had for the entire production of the original film. Despite its rushed production, Scary Movie 2 was another massive commercial success. While not grossing as much as the original film, and with a budget of $45 million, doubling that of Scary Movies, Scary Movie 2 still brought in a worldwide gross of $141 million. However, while the original Scary Movie is remembered for its boundary-pushing comedy and record-setting performance, its larger cultural legacy has not garnered as much praise. What followed then was a bona fide franchise, with not 1, not 2, but 3 more sequels, and ushered in an era of insane bottom-of-the-barrel spin-offs, with each iteration more and more a violet whiff. A dead leaf echo of the original film we all love to watch with roarous laughter and cries in the past. Can you tell I read a book once? Yeah! Though, while its sequels and spin-offs have been critically lambasted, It's important to note that, like most of the Wayans works, the original Scary Movie was never actually a critical darling in and of itself. And while audiences and critics have trashed the ensuing sequels and onslaught of parody films for their over-reliance on non-sequitur gags and pop culture references, the original film also contained a fair amount of these elements, though obviously to a significantly lesser degree. Ultimately, what set apart the Wayans' original horror spoof from its derivatives is its focus on character and narrative, as we've now discussed. With the original film relying on the performance and charisma of its cast to relay its comedy, you come to love watching its characters, with gags serving as supplemental to them, not the other way around. So, it's been known for a while now that the Wayans' involvement with the franchise abruptly ended during early development of Scary Movie's third installment, with the Wayans receiving the news, during a holiday break, that the Weinsteins, owners of Dimension Films and its parent company Miramax, had not only declined the terms of a new deal between the brothers for the second sequel, but had already reached out to other artists for the development of the project, effectively and permanently severing the brothers' ties to the successful franchise they built. While the specific details about the brothers' deal with Dimension Films aren't known, with the Wayans so far having spoke modestly about their abrupt firing, it's clear that their lack of involvement with the franchise, and in a lot of respects, those films' influence on spin-offs, led to a very clear artistic and tonal shift, most apparent in each of the film's less raunchy components. After Scary Movie 2, all sequels aim for a PG-13 rating, a shift from the hard R rating of the first two. Obviously, the intent of a lower rating was a means to market the film to a much broader audience, and I suppose it worked considering every sequel has been commercially successful since. Though, I don't think this choice has any bearing on the content of those films anyways. Like, you don't watch Scary Movie 4 and think, oh, the MPAA dropped the ball on this one. Obviously, the issue with those sequels is their writing, not their rating. Though, Scary Movie 3 still has some pretty edgy stuff. And remember those two writers I spoke about earlier? Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer? The two who received unjustified credit for Scary Movie despite not writing any of it? Well, they went on to write several Scary Movie spin-offs. You might have heard of them. Date Movie, Epic Movie, Meet the Spartans, and Disaster Movie, amongst many others. With the latter three having the dubious distinction of not just being critically panned comedies, but also being among some of the worst films ever made, period. And perhaps it's the best time to talk about the second elephant in the room, and that is that all of the Scary Movies are pretty trash. Yes, this entire video has been clickbait. Thank you very much for watching. Okay, so what do I mean? Apart from the first Scary Movie, which itself received an incredibly modest and lukewarm response from critics, the rest of the films in the franchise have been more or less critically dunked on, and I did mention that briefly earlier, but I want to draw further attention to it as we wrap up this video, and I begin delegating which films in the franchise are the best. Now, I don't want to give the impression that I wholly think critics and critics' scores are an entire indication of how enjoyable, entertaining, or good a film is, because that's a whole other discussion, though these people did not like Kung Pao Enter the Fist, so perhaps they don't really know anything about anything.
I'll take a pound of nuts. That's a lot of nuts!
What I'm saying is that it's okay. It's okay if the franchise is trash, or lowbrow as critics may put it, because it's not aspiring to be anything else but trash. It's trash to go see after a long week of working, or doing taxes, or after dealing with stress, or whatever. It's trash you put on, turn your brain off, and have fun with. It's beautiful trash. It's our trash. What I'm saying is that, well, fuck critics for one, but also that it's totally fine if you happen to like the less well-received sequels. After all, we're all clowns in this here circus. So, setting once and for all, which Scary Movies are the best? And this is the final word, because I am a content creator, and as such, am never wrong. Now, the typical consensus is that the raunchy, Wayans-driven comedy of Scary Movie 1 and 2 often stand out as the best in the entire franchise, with the gag-driven sequels often placing at the very bottom, most often with Scary Movie 5 being dead last. Personally, I think the first three films are really, really good, with Scary Movie 2 being a bit better than Scary Movie 1. I know, hot take. Though I owe that largely to nostalgia and my memories of watching the Scary Movie 2 DVD relentlessly as a kid, which I shouldn't have, but it happened, and it is what it is. I think Scary Movie 3 still has enough of that post-Wayans charm that makes it really enjoyable. The cast remained largely the same, obviously without Shorty and Ray, but the performances of Anna Faris, I can't pronounce names, I'm sorry, and Regina Hall are still as charming as ever.
Now who the fuck did that?
With the goofy performances of Simon Rex and Charlie Sheen were also a standout. I never actually watched Scary Movies 4 and 5, so perhaps I shouldn't even be making this list, or this video. Fuck.
I know you told your friend you're not okay, and tell me what's wrong and why you never said you felt that way. And guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I've known you too long, it hurts to watch your blue eyes fade to gray as you fade away.